Chapter 8 Snefru's Pyramid. All the rest of the afternoon, Coffee and Sari had a wonderful time playing with the royal children in the palace garden. Khufu was older than Sakaris, so most of his children were older than Coffee. But there was one boy of 10 and another boy and girl who were not much older. The three of them and Coffee and Sari had such a good time playing games and splashing in the garden pool that by bedtime they all felt very well acquainted. At last they were sent to bed, or rather, Coffee was. Sari lay down on a mat at the foot of his bed, but neither of them went to sleep. They were much too excited to be sleepy, so they lay and watched the darkness fall over the garden outside, and thought about the stone they had found, and Sakaris, who would soon be on his way to Snefru's pyramid. "I wish we could go," said Coffee wistfully. Sari was thinking the same thing. "I wish we could too," she said. They began to feel sorry for themselves because they were being left behind. Then suddenly, Coffee sat up in bed. "Sari," he cried, "we could go!" Sari sat up too. "How?" she asked. "The litter is down in the courtyard," said Coffee. "We could hide under the cushions until they got started." "But your father would send us back when he found us," said Sari. "He couldn't," said Coffee, "because he wouldn't have anybody to send back with us. Num has gone home, and nobody else is going with father except the slaves who carry the litter." "Oh, but he would be very angry," said Sari. Coffee jumped out of bed and began to put on his kilt and sandals. "Yes, he would be, but he couldn't do anything except punish us. Just think," he went on, "how exciting it would be to ride out in the desert at night to a tomb that has been robbed. Why, we might even meet the robbers and have a fight. We couldn't miss anything like that. We must go. Come on. It's almost dark now. They'll be starting soon." It took Sari only a minute to get ready. They crept out into the hall. "Do you know the way to the courtyard?" Sari whispered. "This is such a big palace, we might get lost in it." But they did not get lost, and no one saw them as they tiptoed to the courtyard door. The guards in the palace hall were probably eating their supper, for they were nowhere to be seen. But outside the door the children could hear the two Nubians talking. Coffee had forgotten them. "We can't get past them," whispered Sari. "Not unless we can get them to go away for a minute," Coffee whispered back. "How? How can we?" asked Sari. They crept right up to the door behind the guards. Then Coffee leaned down and unstrapped one of his sandals. Sari watched him. He waited until both guards were looking the other way, and then he threw the sandal as hard as he could out onto the courtyard. It fell with a soft plop on the brick pavement. "What was that?" asked one of the guards. "I didn't hear anything," said the other. "I did," said the first one. "Come, we had better look around to make sure no one is hiding out there in the shadows." They both moved away from the door, and as soon as they did, the two children crept out of the doorway and dashed to the nearest pillar. The guards did not hear them, and as they reached their hiding place, they heard one of the Nubians say, "This must be what made the noise. It's a sandal. Probably those willful children of our masters are playing again after they are supposed to be in bed." Coffee and Sari sighed with relief. They crept carefully along from pillar to pillar until they reached the litter. Then they buried themselves under the cushions at the end, where Sakaris would put his feet. It was very hot and stuffy, but they had not been there more than a moment or two before they heard voices in the courtyard. The slaves were coming out to the litter. The slaves stood talking among themselves while they waited for Sakaris. Coffee soon could tell by their voices that they were not slaves who usually carried Sakaris's litter. Suddenly there were more footsteps, and he heard his father say, "Ready, guards?" "Ah, so," thought Coffee, "these aren't just litter-bearers whom Khufu has given us. They are real guards. This is going to be even more exciting than I thought." The litter shook as Sakaris got in and settled himself. One of his feet touched Coffee's leg under the cushions, but if Sakaris thought that the cushion had suddenly become hard and lumpy, he did not say anything. Probably he was busy thinking about the robbery of Snefru's tomb, and did not notice. The slaves swung the litter to their shoulders, and off they started towards the palace gates. Coffee and Sari, of course, could not see anything, but they could tell pretty well where they were by the sounds they heard. They heard the guards challenge Sakaris at the palace gates, and they heard the street noises as they went through the city. Then everything was quiet again, and all they could hear was the padding sound of the slaves' feet on hard earth. "We are on the dike," thought Coffee to himself. "We ought to go to Memphis soon." But the minutes went by, or maybe it was hours, and still they did not come to Memphis. It was a long time before Coffee realized that they were not going to Memphis at all, but were taking another road, which would lead them to the edge of the desert near Snefru's pyramid. Coffee had often seen this road far off across the valley, but he had never been on it. By this time it seemed at least 100 years since they had left the palace, and Coffee began to wonder if this trip was going to be as much fun as he had imagined. Every part of him seemed to be asleep. There were pins and needles in his hands and feet, and he was nearly smothered. There was a feather from one of the pillows tickling his nose, too. That made him even more uncomfortable. Besides, he began to wonder just how he would tell Sakaris that he and Sari were there, and when he would do it. Somehow the punishment that he was certainly going to get seemed more distasteful now than it had back in the bedroom at the palace. But he didn't have to worry about it very long, because his fate was decided for him. It was the feather that did it. It kept right on tickling Coffee's nose. Suddenly he knew he was going to sneeze, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He tried to hold it back, but he couldn't, and so it was that Sakaris heard a very loud "Choo!" from right under the cushions at his feet. It did not take Sakaris long to decide what to do. He ordered the litter set down, sprang out quickly, and seizing the cushions, threw them on the ground. Then he took hold of the children and pulled them out just the way he had the cushions. When he saw who they were, he was so astonished that all he could think of was to say, "Where did you come from?" And he didn't sound at all happy to see them. Coffee and Sari were stiff from lying curled up under the cushions, and the way Sakaris was looking at them did not make them feel any better. "From the palace," said Coffee in a very small voice, answering Sakaris's question lightly. "We wanted to see Snurfu's pyramid," he added. But somehow, out there on the dike in the dead of night, with his father and the guards all staring at him and Sari, it did not sound like a very good reason for coming. "And I suppose," said Sakaris, "you knew that when I discovered you were here, I could not send you back because I need all these men to carry the litter?" "Yes, father," said Coffee miserably. Then he added, "Won't you please punish us now and get it over with? It would be so much pleasanter." "I have no doubt that it would," answered Sakaris, "but I haven't time now. You can be certain, however, that I shall attend to it first thing in the morning. Now, get into the litter and see that you do not cause any more trouble." The guards had by this time put the cushions back where they belonged. Sakaris stepped in, and the two children scrambled in after him. Away they went again toward the desert. For a long time nobody said anything. The two children thought that perhaps the less they said, the better off they would be. Besides, it was so quiet that after a while they began to get sleepy. Pretty soon, in spite of all they could do, their heads nodded, and they fell asleep on each other's shoulders. Some time later, Coffee woke up. The litter was doing very strange things. It was bobbing around like a ship in a storm. When he looked out from under the canopy, Coffee saw why. They had left the valley behind them, and now all around them was just desert, dull and gray in the starlight. The bears were plowing through the soft sand which gave under their feet, and pitched the litter this way and that. Coffee nudged Sari. She woke up and saw where they were, too. They quite forgot that they were in disgrace, and Coffee said to Sakaris, "It's awfully dark out here, isn't it?" Somehow the wide rolling desert didn't look like a very cozy place to spend the night. "Yes, it is very dark tonight," said Sakaris. "This is the night of the new moon, so there is no light to brighten the sand. But we are almost there now. See, there is a pyramid ahead of us. You can make it out against the sky if you look hard enough." Coffee and Sari strained their eyes through the darkness, and at last they saw it too, another pyramid. Smaller than Khufu's, but quite big enough to look very black and mysterious rising up against the starry sky. For no reason at all, a shiver ran up Coffee's spine and came down again. Sari, sitting close beside him, felt it. "What's the matter?" she asked. "Are you cold?" "No," said Coffee. He would not admit that the dark night and the big pyramid looming up ahead of them made him feel suddenly afraid. When they were quite near, Sakaris ordered the litter to be set down behind a little hill of sand so that they were out of sight of the pyramid. "Why do we stop here?" asked Coffee in a whisper. He noticed that the guards were talking in whispers too. "There is no use in calling attention to ourselves in case anyone happens to be around, though I doubt if anyone is," answered Sakaris. He called softly to the guards. When they had gathered around, Sakaris said to them, "First, we shall have to find out how the robbers got into the pyramid. That will probably take some time, as they may have covered up their tracks. 2 men will stay here by the litter. The others will come with me. I shall shout if I need you," he added to the guards who were to stay by the litter. "May Sari and I come with you?" asked Coffee. Sakaris sighed. "I suppose you might as well. But you must stay with the guards. I am not going to finish this night by looking all over the desert for you, and you are not going into the pyramid either with me or after me. Will you promise me that?" "Yes," said both children, though Coffee wanted dreadfully to go inside the pyramid, even if just the thought of it did scare him. "Very well, then," said Sakaris. And calling the guards, he and the children started off toward the pyramid. When they reached it, Sakaris turned to the guards. "I think it's likely that the robbers tunneled in to one of the tomb passages, so let's search around the edge to see if we can find any traces of such a tunnel." They worked along one side of the huge pile of stone, then started along the next without seeing anything in the least out of the way. It was hard to see anything at all because it was so dark. Then one of the guards who had gone ahead gave a low cry. They ran up to him, and there, close to the side of the pyramid, was a large dark hole like the entrance to a cave, with a sloping pathway leading down to it through the sand. "Strange that they should leave it uncovered like that," said Sakaris to one of the guards. Yes, master, unless what? Asked Sakaris. Unless they were interrupted and had to leave suddenly. This entrance is on the desert side of the pyramid, and perhaps they thought it would not be noticed before they could get back and cover it up again. Very likely you are right, said Sakaris. Now light a torch for me. I am going inside. Alone, master? Asked the guards. Yes, answered Sakaris. I do not think I shall need any help. Coffee thought the guards seemed relieved that they did not have to go in with Sakaris, and he could not blame them. He thought his father was very brave to go into the tomb alone. Sakaris took the torch and made his way down the sloping path to the tunnel entrance. The children followed him. He flashed his torch inside, and they could see a narrow, steep passage that had been dug under the pyramid. Now, said Sakaris, you two stay right here until I get back. You are not to come 1 foot inside this passage. Do you understand? Yes, said Coffee. We can't anyway. It will be too dark after you have taken the torch. They stood there and watched Sakaris start down the passage. His torch shone further and further away. Then it vanished, and they guessed that he had turned a corner. There was a dim glow for a second or two, and then that too faded away, and they were left staring into the dark hole in front of them. It was rather frightening to wait there beside the black tunnel. The two children drew near together in the darkness. It was so still that they could hear the breathing of the guards who squatted at the head of the path to the tunnel. They could hear their own hearts beating too, and not another sound. They looked up at the stars and off across the gray desert and wished that Sakaris would hurry back with the torch. They had been waiting for some time when Sari thought she saw something move just over the top of a little hill of sand near the pyramid. Her heart seemed to fly up into her mouth for a minute. She whispered to Coffee, "Do you see anything moving over there?" She pointed to the sand hill. Coffee looked where she pointed. "No," he whispered. "I don't see anything. Is it moving now?" "No," said Sari. "It isn't. But I'm sure I saw something that looked like a man's head." They kept on watching, but everything was quiet and the sand hill looked just the way a sand hill should look. After a while, Sari began to think she must have imagined seeing something bob up for a second against the sky. Just the same, they did not feel very comfortable waiting there in the dark. It seemed hours since Sakaris had left them. Finally, when they thought they could not bear it another minute, they heard a faint sound from inside the pyramid. A tiny, dull glow appeared at the back of the tunnel. Coffee had just time to whisper to Sari, "Here comes father," when they saw the light of a torch and heard the sound of running feet. "Something must be the matter," said Coffee. "He's running." Now they could see a figure holding a torch coming pell-mell toward them. Coffee almost called out as he came nearer, but suddenly he held his breath. There was something unfamiliar about that figure racing toward them. Coffee did not know what it was, but all at once he was sure that that man was not Sakaris, and if it was not his father, it must be somebody who had no business being inside Snerufu's pyramid. Coffee did not have time after that to think what to do, for the man was almost at the tunnel entrance, so he went ahead and did the only thing he could do. He lowered his head, just as a red boy did when he was charging in a fight, and hurled himself right at the stomach of the running man. That was the sound of someone falling heavily, and then gasping for breath. Sari screamed, and Coffee called to the guards for a torch. When the guards reached the tunnel, the light from the torch shone on such a strange scene that they cried out in surprise, for there was Coffee sitting astride a man who was doubled up and groaning. "Bring the torch nearer," cried Coffee. "I want to see who this man is." The guards obeyed him. Then it was Coffee's turn to cry out in amazement, for the man on the ground was none other than his old acquaintance, Amenhotep. For a moment, Coffee was terrified at what he had done. It was a serious matter to ram one's head into the stomach of an Egyptian noble and knock the breath out of him. But then a great many things began to flash through Coffee's mind. He thought of the chest that Sari and he had sat on in Amenhotep's litter on the night he rescued them from the flood, and how Amenhotep left them at the gate and hurried away. He thought, too, of the bowl that had cost a great deal of money, and of the stolen stone with a tiny hawk carved upon it. "Sorry," he cried. "I didn't make a mistake. Amenhotep is the man who robbed the pyramid." By this time the guards were helping Amenhotep to his feet, and Amenhotep was protesting that what Coffee had said was outrageous. His language was not very polite, and the guards were worried for fear Coffee was wrong. But just in case he was right, they were keeping a tight hold on Amenhotep's arms. Then another figure staggered from the tunnel. It was Sakaris. His head was bleeding, and he no longer had a torch with him. He looked very grim indeed. "Oh, father!" cried Coffee. "You're hurt!" But Sakaris didn't seem to hear him. "Someone hit me over the head just as I stepped into the tomb chamber. He ran down the tunnel. Did you get him?" he asked the guards. Then he saw the man they were holding between them, and when he saw who it was, he sounded almost as surprised as Coffee had been. "Amenhotep!" he cried. Amenhotep did not say a word, but he began to struggle to get away, and just then Sakaris swayed and crumbled up in a heap on the ground. One of the guards let go of Amenhotep to help Sakaris. Amenhotep, seeing his chance, twisted free of the other guard and began to run toward the little sand hill where Sari had thought she was something moving. saw something moving while they were waiting by the tunnel. "Stop him! Stop him!" cried Coffee. Sari screamed, and hearing all the noise, the guards from the litter started running toward the pyramid. The others were already chasing Amenhotep, but he could run very fast, and he was frightened besides, which made him run even faster. So before anyone could catch him, he had reached the sandhill and scrambled over it. Coffee and Sari left Amenhotep to the guards. Suddenly he didn't matter, for Sakaris was hurt. Coffee was afraid his father was badly hurt, and as he knelt beside him, he forgot that he was a big boy of 10 years old. He began to cry. Sari was crying too, but Sakaris had only fainted from the pain of the blow that Amenhotep had given him, and he soon opened his eyes and tried to sit up. "What happened?" he asked. Coffee and Sari told him the whole story. Just as they finished, the guards came running back, but they did not bring Amenhotep with him. "He got away, master," said one. "He had a litter waiting for him behind the sandhill over there." "Then I did see a man's head over the top of that hill," exclaimed Sari, and they told Sakaris all about that too. "Which way did they go?" Sakaris asked the guards. "Out into the desert, master," answered the guards. "We tried to catch them, but they ran like the wind." Sakaris sighed as if he was tired. "Perhaps it is just as well," he said. "But why, father?" said Coffee. "Won't he come back and rob the tomb some other time?" Sakaris shook his head. "No, Coffee, he will not dare. We know who he is now, thanks to you and the guards, and if he ever came back to Egypt, Khufu's soldiers would surely find him." "What would they do to him?" "What they do to all traitors. They would put him to death," answered Sakaris. "But where will he go now?" "I don't know," said Sakaris. "To some other country, perhaps. Anyway, we have seen the last of him. But come, we can't stay here talking all night. We must cover up that tunnel as best we can. Then we must go back to the palace and tell Khufu what has happened." It took the guards some time to cover up the mouth of the tunnel, but at last they brought the litter and helped Sakaris in. His head had stopped bleeding, and he began to feel much better. He lay back among the cushions, and Coffee and Sari crawled in beside him. Now that all the excitement was over, they felt very tired, and before they reached the edge of the valley, they were sound asleep, all 3 of them.